she was convicted, not once but twice, for the murder of 21-year-old British student Meredith Kercher. And despite being acquitted and fully exonerated, Amanda Knox still cannot escape the shadows of her past. In January, a judge upheld a slander charge against her for falsely accusing her former boss of the murder.
Well, she spent 4 years behind bars in an Italian jail for Meredith's murder and was dubbed Foxy Knoxy by the media. She's written a new memoir and she describes how this nickname was catnip to the global press, but it didn't describe who she was.
Well, as we've said, Amanda Knox joins us live now and exclusively from New York. Good morning to you, Amanda. Very early morning for you there, nearly just gone 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
The obvious danger of writing a book like this one is that you do two things, isn't it? You drag it all up again, which is bound to disturb Meredith's family, and you risk looking as if you're capitalising on your own tragedy. What would you say to those two basic points?
Well, I would say that my first book was a very different one than this book. I think I'm very proud of Waiting to Be Heard. It was written at a time where I felt like so many people were authoring my experience and saying what it was, and I felt like I needed to set the record straight. But it was written at a time where I was very much deeply enmeshed in the legal saga and in proving my innocence. Today, I look at this as an opportunity to share the story of not erasing the past, but really learning from the past so that we can live better lives, and personally and as a society.
And what about Meredith's family, the impact on them?
Well, I hope that they read my book because I really honor Meredith's memory in the book, but I also believe that my story, honoring her past and her story, does not mean erasing my own. And I am a person who is continuing to pursue justice in this case, but a bigger issue that I try to speak to in Free is how do we all overcome the traumas that are in our lives, regardless of whether or not we get what we deserve.
Do you feel, and this is a personal matter for you, do you feel that in writing this book and then publishing this book, you're simply continuing the process of demonisation? Because you know what it's like to be falsely accused of something. There are some people who will never accept that you're innocent. And even though you've written this book, as you say, it's the second one, by talking about it again, by, as I said, dragging it all up again, you risk the pointing fingers from the other side of the street, saying, there she is, she did it.
Well, I mean, I'm not talking a lot about the trial in this case. I'm really talking about what it's like to, after you have been through a very traumatic and overwhelming experience, how do you reintegrate into your life? How do you take what has been imposed upon you that is a very traumatic experience and not let it define you? I really try to take what I have been through and provide universal lessons that I think will make other people feel really seen. I think that what I went through was very catastrophic and very unusual in many ways, but the lessons that I've derived from it are all really personal and universal. I spend a lot of time in this book discussing all the mistakes and misadventures that I had after I came out of prison, when I was technically free, but I was very much not free at all. I was the girl accused of murder, and I had to really sit with that and recognize oh my goodness, my identity is inextricably linked with the death of my friend that I had nothing to do with. Now what? So what? And I think that struggle of trying to find who I am in a world that really wanted me to shut up and disappear because they didn't feel like my life mattered and my perspective mattered was a journey that was really hard. And I think that a lot of people will potentially see themselves in.
You spent almost 4 years in prison and 8 years on trial for Meredith's murder, but you are acquitted and exonerated. There was an individual, Rudy Grady, who was eventually convicted. But you have lost an appeal against a slander conviction. You had a 3-year sentence for wrongly accusing a completely different person. I think it was your boss at the time, a Congolese bar owner called Patrick Lumumba. Why did you accuse him of the murder?
Oh, well, I didn't. So I think that's very important to recognize that the European Court of Human Rights has already recognized that what I went through in my interrogation was absolutely illegal and against my human rights. I was coerced into making statements that I had no intention of making, and I never, ever knowingly and willingly implicated an innocent man. I was tortured into believing that he might have had something to do with the murder, and those are the statements that I signed. But they were ruled out as evidence in this new trial, and I think it's really telling that the Italian court decided to convict me based on a retraction of those statements that I was coerced into signing. I think it's really telling that the Italian justice system is really facing a problem of the cost of recognizing my innocence. I think that there was resistance to acknowledging that I was a young girl who was tortured and betrayed by the police in the immediate aftermath of another young girl being murdered. And I think that there's an unwillingness to recognize fault by the authorities.
But do you have any recourse then in that case?
I don't know yet. I'm waiting for the motivation document. One of the great things about the Italian justice system is all verdicts are motivated. And so I'm waiting to receive that document so I can better understand their reasoning and potentially appeal to the European Court of Human Rights yet again.
So you have not stopped in your fight to clear your name, as you say, in that part of the case? Because that, of course, that conviction upheld still hangs over you. What impact does that have on you?
Oh, my goodness, it's huge. I mean, I don't think that I ever would have been convicted of murder were it not for the fact that I had been accused of slander. I think that putting me in a position of terrifying a 20-year-old girl and denying her human rights until she thought that she was crazy positioned me as someone who was suspect in the public eye, because I think that a lot of people really don't understand what it's like in an interrogation room. And when you are a young person who has already gone through something very traumatizing, like if I had never been accused of murder, I still would be like processing the fact that I came home to discover my friend and roommate murdered in my house, and that it very well could have been me if I hadn't been lucky enough to meet a young man 5 days before. So I think that I was very much suggestible and vulnerable in those moments. But you know what? Like, I look at, like, one of the messages of Free, My Search for Meaning, is that regardless of all of that, and the fact that there are some people in the world who will always project their negative fantasies onto me, that doesn't define who I am. It doesn't. Like, I've really had to go, like, really combat that sense that I am defined by these boxes that people want to put me in. And I think there's a sense that, like, I would need to disappear or run away from that fact. But in the same way that I've chosen never to change my name because there's nothing wrong with me, I also do not believe that I should hide from my past and the fact that I have gone through this experience. I have learned, and I've worked so hard to learn from it. And now I'm really looking forward to standing on top of that box that people have shoved me in and sharing my message with the world.
We're going to ask you about your friendship with Monica Lewinsky in just a second. But just before that, when you look back, as you yourself say, you were barely out of your teens when this catastrophe, when the roof fell in, basically, on all of you involved in this. I want to ask you this. How much do you think that the media's obsession with your looks at the time, I mean, we mentioned that sobriquet of Foxy Knoxy, which went around and around. The media seemed obsessed with the way that you looked. When you look back, do you think that your appearance at that time was in any way part and parcel of what happened to you? Why you were accused, why you were charged, why the Italian police became so almost obsessed with you as their guilt figure?
Yeah, I think that there is something to that. I was a pretty young girl. Meredith was a pretty young girl. And I think that ultimately, if you really look deep down at what the messaging was, what was being packaged by the prosecution and the media, was this very vicious and horrible myth of a woman-hating woman. That there was this idea that, like, a sexualized woman is constantly in competition with another woman. And I was disgusted not only by how I was misrepresented as this, you know, drug-addled whore, but also how Meredith was misrepresented as this, like, uptight, judgmental person. She was not. We were both young, you know, young girls at the cusp of our life, and it was really unfair how we were both sort of turned into mythological figures that didn't exist and that were not representative of reality.
OK, you have found an unusual ally in Monica Lewinsky, and I believe you're making a film together of the experience that you went through. I just want to put to you something that the family lawyer for the Meredith Kercher family said, Francesco Maresca. It seems the initiatives of Knox continue to be inappropriate and disrespectful towards the memory of Meredith. It's evident that for Knox, the Perugia trial continues to be a source of income and a series of opportunities to maintain her name in the media. Mrs. Knox, after so many years, should respect the silence and memory. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say that he's a hypocrite, honestly. As someone who has himself profited not just off of the work that he has done on the case, but also on writing his own book, I think that Mr. Maresca can very politely keep his opinions to himself. He has always been very much a man who has never, ever considered my humanity and my experience, and is subject to something that I like to call the single victim fallacy. The idea that in a tragic event, there can only be one victim, and that is simply not true. And so I think that I don't really care what Mr. Maresca thinks, to be frank.
And finally, a brief word on Monica Lewinsky, and how did you have that connection?
You know, Monica came into my life very much at a time where I was very, very lost and beaten down. I had spent years, my entire adult life, with people telling me that I didn't matter, that my life didn't matter, that no one would ever believe me. And she was right there at the moment when someone first asked me to tell my story for a group of people. And I was terrified. I didn't know what they were going to think of me. I didn't know what ideas of me they had in their mind. And I very much felt like I was the only place for me in this world was no place. And she came in and showed me from her example that a woman who has been demonized and sexualized does not just disappear, and in fact can use her experience to reframe our understanding of the world, to really examine ourselves both as media creators and media consumers. And she really gave me the courage to uplift my voice in a very similar way that my husband did.
All right. Amanda Knox, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. It's an interesting book, and it's been fascinating talking to you.
Very interesting conversation. Thank you for that.